thank you. Welcome back to the workshop. This morning session ended with a lot of questions, which is great, which was exactly which was more than expected. And now the afternoon session is starting, and the pleasure to introduce Philippe Pasquier, who is professor at Simon Fraser University in the School of Design and Art. I don't remember. You will say better. Yeah. And Philippe, please.
Thanks, Jean-Pierre. Well, everyone, super happy to be here. I want to thank, of course, for the generous invitation. It's great to make new friends. I understand that people here like Rio, which is a great city along the ocean with mountains everywhere. If you do like Rio, but you don't like it, and you don't really like the sun, then Vancouver is a great place to visit because we have a great city with mountains and the ocean and an archipelago of islands. But the weather is a bit.
With the climate change, you had a 46 degree Celsius.
And that's right. Year after year, Canada is becoming more like California. So, yeah. One of the few advantages of global warming in Canada, we like global warming. Yes. Okay, I'm just joking, of course. So yeah, I'm a professor at the School for Interactive Arts and Technology, which is an interdisciplinary school where computer science meets cognitive science, design, and media art, and we operate on unceded territory of the Squamish Nation in beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia. So I'm not going to bore you with AI because everyone knows about it. My quick definition of creative AI is this idea of trying to automate partially or completely creative tasks. And creative tasks can't really be addressed by rational problem-solving techniques very easily because the notion of optimal, Pareto dominance, utility, whatever you call it, is a lot harder to define. In the lab, we do that across modalities, but today, because of the workshop, I'll focus on music and maybe make a few references to the rest. In what we do in the lab, there's two broad contexts for those algorithms to exist. The first context is computer-assisted creativity, interactive generation, co-creation, as we call it, where we try to embed creative AI in creative software. There's very few automation in creative software, and the creative world, the video game world, the content creation world, the film world, is becoming a click factory where we get people that are fantastic people that come to work to sit in front of a computer and click on buttons all day long, right? So is that better than chain work? Maybe, maybe not. And they do that for weeks and months. So we try to maybe improve those creative software. If automation and augmentation can help, that would be good. The second family of approaches is when we want to embed a generative system and generate in real time some content. And that's relevant for interactive experiences, games, educational experiences, interactive systems, installations, interactive artworks, in which we want to maintain a flow between the user and the content. And we can do that by programming nonlinear system manually, but it turns out that often it's a good idea to generate the right content at the right moment for the right user. Okay, so I'll start with the first families of approaches. And I will just talk about the most recent work and quickly actually start talking about work that is not published yet so that you guys get to drill me with questions, before it's out, before it's out there. So I'll start with computer-assisted composition. We have a paper that we're gonna release soon that I'm happy to share with the group in a few weeks. It's still a bit drafty, where we do a taxonomy of computer-assisted composition systems. And as I was mentioning to some of you earlier, we listed over 70 of them. And we define a number of dimensions to try to classify them and try to map them. Yeah, exactly, same idea there, and see what has been done, what has not been done, where there's redundancies and things like that. Ourselves, we've been working on algorithm for computer-assisted composition. And our latest algorithm is MMM, the multi-track music machine. And so I'll play a quick video showing a little bit what the system does. And then this is in the Google Colab interface. You can access it online. But I will talk about other interfaces that are maybe more interesting for musicians to use that system after the video. Right, so that is the idea. And in a way, it's very similar to what we've seen before, computer-assisted composition. Here, the unit is a bar, and I'll talk about it a little bit in detail. It's actually a transformer model that is trained on a new data set that we just released a few weeks ago at the Izmir conference called MetaMidi. It is just the largest MIDI data set out there, building on the previously largest one, the LAC MIDI data set, but with a lot more metadata, hence the name MetaMidi. I recommend having a look at it if you're interested in finding vast quantity of MIDI information. And the transformer is surprisingly a very basic Hugging Face style transformer with 6 layers, 20 million weights. The attention window will be between 1 and 8 bar, and the model is really dealing with the bar. So the exact complementary approach to Bertrand. Bertrand has a great system for structuring a piece and making musical forms over the long term. Once you have musical block, we're interested in helping people to generate musical blocks themselves. The only innovation really is we introduced a new representation, which is pretty straightforward, and we were surprised nobody went that way before. We just have a bar that is a sequence of notes encoded with the usual time delta vis-a-vis the bar, and then tracks are sequence of bars, and then it's a multi-track system, and so then you have sequences of track. And with that, it means that I can add a new track. I have already a bass, a drum, and a guitar. I had a piano. I had 3 violins. I want to add 2 trumpets, no problem. I can regenerate a track that I don't like, of course, but I can be more specific and regenerate some bars. Condition on what's around horizontally, but of course, condition on what's around vertically as well. And of course, with windowing, you can generate longer sections by going through a piece, but there's no guarantee if you have an A, B, A piece that the second A will be regenerated in a way that makes sense to the A. So really, the bar and the 8-bar window is what we're working with at the moment. The limit is, we think, mainly computational at the moment, but it might be not be, because the problem that Bertrand is addressing is one that is a long-standing problem in computer music of nobody really cracked that nut of musical structure. What's interesting is that not only the system can generate and regenerate music that makes sense in the musical context, but that you can control how it generates things. And in terms of control, we have control over time signature, over note density per track or per bar, note duration, a range, or a fixed duration I want, the amount of silence, and with the composition of those 3 parameters, you get a good control of some sort of content density and textures. Minimum polyphony, maximum polyphony. The model, if you ask to generate saxophone, we sort of know that the saxophone instrument in MIDI is usually monophonic, but if you have a synthesizer that has only 3 voices of polyphony, you don't want the system to generate 4 voices. So you want to control that. You want to control, eventually the system can give you for free velocity, which is something that is really expensive to do manually, especially if you're not playing the instruments yourself. And then there's other controls that we are rolling out right now. Style control, resample that bass in the style of reggae, in the style of pop, or in the style of the Beatles. We can be specific, artist specific if we want to. I think we're going to get into copyright issues in the future if we really do that, but it is possible right now to load some reggae and ask the system to reassemble some parts in the style of Metallica, if only for the sake of exploration. And then, of course, other attributes like Spotify attribute. And right now, we're also working on controlling the valence, the arousal, and attention. I'll come back to that in a minute. This system is a state of the art, I believe, at the moment. It compares to some of the ones we've seen so far. It does the same task. You can do continuation, bar level imprinting, track level imprinting, controls, and then we have up to 12 polyphonic tracks supported at the moment, which is more than what others are doing. Yeah, and so because it's working fairly well, we contacted and got, or they contacted us at times, some industry music software developers have been interested. So we work with Elias for video game music composition, and they're planning on releasing the new system next year with the MMM model in there. We're doing a plugin for Ableton Live, a Max for Live plugin to start with to see how it works, because this notion of clip in Ableton works quite well to be generated. And in fact, I have a working version here that if you're interested, I can onboard you and you can try it for yourself with your own music. Online, you will find examples as well of people doing bar, like adding pop tracks to bar, like sort of what Pache was doing. You can basically do all of that sort of things. And it seems to work pretty well for what we've been looking at now. And then with Steinberg, they're interested in also integrating the system in Cubase, but they're mostly interested in trying to see what composers are thinking of it and to make acceptability studies, because they've been done before with and trying to introduce any type of automation into music production. We also work with synthesizer maker, because in the electronic music world, one of the main block of aspiring musicians and basically untrained musicians that want to make electronic music is that they don't really know how to make harmonic progressions, how to so the system or generate new beats, and the system will do all of that for free. So it's interactive curation type of approaches. And I recommend actually this. This is here the latest synthesizer from Teenage Engineering. It's the OP-Z. It looks tiny and like a toy, but it's €1,000 and it's a beast. And it's an audio-visual synthesizer where finally someone had the idea to go back to where we were in the 70s, where you would generate the visuals, which are completely necessary for a lot of musical style right now. You don't exist if you don't have visuals. Why do we do the music first and then someone has to do the visuals after, if we can actually program and use some of the control we use for controlling the music to control the visuals? So there's a Unity track here, there's a DMX tracks to control the lighting, and there's a lot of visual, video, and effects. So I just wanted to plug that because I think it's a good innovation. These guys were the designers of the Electron series, which is arguably some of the most successful synthesizers out there. We love Swedish designers, so we're happy to work with them. I am using the system myself in my production of electronic music. Find Monobore on Spotify. It sounds like this. It's house music. So that's me here playing with the system. I probably could have composed that without the system, but using the prototype we have for this synthesizer right now. We also developed our own interface, more rich, more complex, web-based interface called Apollo. It's live online, and you can try it for yourself. And with Apollo, we're not just interested in having the system being able to work on MIDI, but we're interested in integrating new types of features that we believe are interesting and promising, such as batch generation, when you can ask the system, make me 100 variation of that bass line, or 100 variation of that entire piece, and ranking, and then rank all the generation vis-a-vis their distance to the original, or vis-a-vis their distance to another artist or another song. And so this idea of being able to deal with more than one variation at a time, I believe is part of the future. We call that disjunctive interfaces. In HCI, it's not a new idea. as you know, in the software we use every day, typically it's there's a unique state. Those are mono-state software. You click on a button, you move to the next state. You can undo and do something else, but you won't necessarily manage a lot of branches. And we find that creatives we know, when they start a project, they don't restart it 10 times to explore in 10 different directions, because the investment to go quite far in one direction is so much that you don't want to undo your last 200 operation and start again in a different direction. And so we believe that we need to start thinking of interfaces that allow us to, for example, have different versions of the project and making one change that propagates into all those versions. I think Bertrand has some of that for free in his own system as well. And I think that's the future when it comes to interfaces, disjunctive interfaces. We'll hear about it more in the future. This is how the plugin looks like. Right now, it's a simple version with not all the feature, but most of the feature is still seriously powerful in the sense that it's definitely a way better composer than me. And I'm interested in better composers than me to try it as well to see what they think about it. You got those control of density, everything. And I just want to mention here, there's a control called craziness. And we were talking about this morning about typicality in harmonic progression and things like that. So the craziness is the best we have with neural networks so far, I find. There would be other control we could have for novelty and surprise, but the craziness is basically the entropy, the temperature in the sampling in the network. And if you lower the temperature, it really takes a much more conservative distribution, and you get less surprising, more conservative music. And if you increase the temperature, you increase the entropy, you get more experimental, and you amplify those distribution while still maintaining some sort of musical coherence and context. And so that's a parameter that is sort of interesting to explore. So what we're doing, so there's the chance to pay them so that even if they don't like to work with the system, they're still going to do it and give us that harsh feedback that we really need so that they feel that, they get at least money to spend that time with the system and maybe some satisfaction. I also work with some friends in France, Jackson and his computer band, Mathieu Champagne. Jackson and his computer band is electro music. Mathieu Champagne is a contemporary music composer. Pia Baltazar, Philippe Trump, who is doing electro. So different people. I won't have the time to play a lot of examples, but there's already quite a bit of songs coming out there. And then the study with Steinberg. With Steinberg, we're going to use their pool of composers to work with Cubase. Right now, they're implementing, which is not as simple as we thought it would be, implementing the model so that it works in Cubase with the interface we want. And we're interested, of course, in normal user experience in terms of interface and interface design, but beyond that, we're interested in competence. So competence is the easy one. Is the system perceived as reliable and competent at its task? Does the system produce original and variable output? Does it produce good output always, often, only sometimes, or never? Does the system allow the user to complete the task with an outcome similar or different? Maybe a composer is happy, but he's recognizing like, this is great, but this is not my music, right? And efficiency. Does the system allow the user to carry the task more or less efficiency? Well, certain tasks, certain composers are paid to make pastiche. You know, BBC is like, I want that song because we're going to release in 60 countries. I want a copy of that song because I don't want to pay the copyright for that international release. And there's composers like that. You know, they receive a call on Monday, and by Wednesday afternoon, they need to produce a copy. Does the system allow in a way to save time or effort? And then more interesting for us, at least, is agency, control and expressivity. Does the user have enough control to steer the system generation in ways that allow for the above? You know, if you have a specific aesthetic in mind. You don't want to have to generate 300 times before it starts to sound like you want. So, for example, we can constrain the harmony of the system. We have masking, where you decide exactly what pitch are allowed, not allowed, things like that. So you can go quite far in control, but the more you add control, the more it takes time for controlling the system too. So there's balance there that needs to be found. And then in the end, does the user feels authorship of the output of the creative process, or does it really seems to be more of a collaboration? And finally, we got a best paper award at CHI, the HCI conference a few years ago, for our new macrophenomenology approach to HCI. And that's more about testing the gut. How do you feel about it for real? Besides the surface level experience, what is the felt, affective, subjective impact of using such systems? And that's why we want that grant, to have really people using it, not for an hour, not for a week, but for a year, like for a serious amount of time. Subjective sensation around the system, aha moments, frustration, which I'm sure there'll be many, and fears and all of that. We want to be tapping into that and documenting that as well. Another example of the use of the system is, and I wanted to just do a shout out for this, because I think for our community it's not a bad news. There's this now yearly AI song contest. The first year it was with the Eurovision competition, I think, and this year it was more independent. But it's an interesting contest, and there's all sorts of professional, non-professional, technologists, and or musicians submitting. There were 34 projects this year, and none of them is using the same systems. None of them is using any of the system in the same way. There's a diversity of process and creative processes that have been invented on the spot. Jean-Pierre gave example with some of the actual bands there, but it's actually mind-blowing the amount of creativity that artists have. Like, I don't know why it's mind-blowing, because that's what you would expect of artists, is to be creative, but that's the way. This is our entry. We lost pretty hard. Maybe not. It's a pop rock, it's a Californian rock song, but he doesn't want to play right now. So I'm going to move on. We also do, I just wanted to mention that by passing computer-assisted sound design, where we have an entire pipeline where you describe a scene. That's more for movie and also for artwork and soundscape composition. SFU, the university where I am, is really known for sound ecology and soundscape research. Barry Truax and Murray Schaeffer, who are the founder of the movement around sound ecology, are at SFU. So we've been collaborating with Barry and others, and we're interested in soundscape generation. So here you basically enter a sentence, a description. The system is online. You'll be able to try it. Kids are playing in the park in the afternoon. You enter a duration, and then you describe the valence and arousal curve of that soundtrack. And the system will find sounds in a database. We segment those sounds into background and foreground. We have the best background, foreground classifier and segmentation. Those are universal classes. That is, we asked 10,000 people online, is this sound a background sound or a foreground sound or a mix? And then we got to see that people agree. The inter-rater agreement is really high. Therefore, there is something to learn. So you train a machine learning, you do it. And so they segment the sounds, retrieve the emotion of those sounds. We also have, it's going to be on the free sound API soon. We have valence and arousal recognition for soundscape. Same thing, we did experiment with thousands of people, gathering data, because we didn't know. Do people agree? If I make silence, do we all agree on the valence and arousal of what we listen? Low arousal? Medium, neutral valence, something like that. Well, so we make the experiment. Do people agree? It turns out they agree. It doesn't matter if they're in China, in Europe, or in Africa. It doesn't matter if they're 6 years old, or 25 years old, or 56 years old. They tend to agree. At least the inter-rater agreement is not too dispersed, and it's not multimodal either, so we can classify. So we do classify that, and then we take all those sound segments, which is really, if you do sound design, the part that is annoying in sound design is to find on your hard drive, amongst the million sound you have, which one to use, how to cut it, segment it. Here, it might not be great. We did evaluation. It's actually better than random what it does, and comparable to some extent to what a beginner sound designer does, because we teach sound design at the university, but clearly not as good as what a professional soundizer does. But the point is, in a few seconds, it gives you this mix, which you can import in Pro Tools or in Logic or in your preferred DAW, and all of a sudden you can start playing around. You don't like it, you press generate again, you get a completely different set of sounds to start with, and eventually iterating, you can gain time and get to a place that you might not have had the time to go to. I could play the video, but instead I'll just play a couple of examples for the sake. I think we lost the sound because we tested this one earlier and it was working. No? Let me try something here. What if I do that? It might be PowerPoint because... Yeah, no, it's not playing. Okay, maybe we'll come back to examples, but I think you guys have heard enough sounds. And so you can use it in very descriptive ways, or you can use it in much more abstract and artistic ways, like any systems, really. What you can be sure with all those music AI systems we've been discussing is if you give it to an artist, they're going to torture the system and make something completely different with it. And that's the way it should be, I guess. And we do computer-assisted creativity for visuals as well, but I'll pass on that. So these are examples of computer-assisted creativity system where you give creators those tools to interact with in the hope that it will be useful. So far, the evidence that it's actually useful are scarce, and so we really want to make those experiments to try to find that out. The second family of approaches I want to brush to quickly today are those embedded generative systems. And by the way, in a way, computer-assisted creativity is the idea of augmenting. So augmentation, like we did with the industrialization, we had augmentation and automation. Augmentation, there is a human operator. Automation, there is none. And at the lab, when we do augmentation, we have our own interface, but we like the idea of augmenting existing interfaces because there's so many people who have spent so many years to learn those interfaces, that became proficient with those interfaces. We believe we would have to have a really, really good reason to actually push forward a new interface. So when we talk about augmentation, we're actually talking about augmentation of existing instruments, existing interfaces, hence the collaboration with those companies. The second family of systems is generative embedded systems. Why would we do that? Well, that's just been said this morning. It's a move from linear media to nonlinear media, which implies an explosion of the number of assets that need to be created. If you make a movie, if you're producing a CD, you should do due diligence and look at every second manually very carefully, of course. But if you do video games with millions and millions of players that on average are going to play between 10 and 30 hours per week for weeks and weeks and weeks, they're all going to start at a different level and they're all going to progress through differently. You do not know. I'm a terrible player. If you give me the level too difficult, it's going to be too hard, you lose me. If the levels stay too easy for too long, it's going to be too boring, I'm going to stop. So that's what we call the flow zone. And to maintain that flow, it's in any interactive experience, including human conversation, you need to keep the interaction going in the right way and deliver the right content for the right person at the right time. I'm not saying we can do that right now, but at least the vision and the idea sort of makes sense to us. And so to get those adaptive experience going, we base everything on this notion of flow. So we did work actually on video game generation already almost 10 years ago, getting some awards there. And we can calculate the tension, for example, in a Mario game based on how far the jumps are, how many jumps there are there other things to avoid? And of course, it's really tempting when you're doing computer music to look at that tension curve and do like, can I actually make music that follows that tension curve? And so that's the idea, is to try to be tempted by that. But first, we were wondering, before we work hard on music generation for video game, we want to make sure it's valuable. And so we did this experiment with my student Kel Plut, because there's a lot of experiments showing that music in film, so in nonlinear media, works. I think you cut the music, people don't cry, you put the music on, they cry, and there's all sorts of experiments showing that it actually really has an impact on the perception, the reception, the immersion in the movie. When you're playing a video game, you're busy. You're cognitively busy, sometimes physically busy. Does music still matter? It turned out it does. And so I invite you to look at that paper here. There's a number of results. And we compare no music with music and music with adaptive music in that paper, and show that adaptivity has also some benefits. And now I want to switch to some forthcoming papers. The first one is the PreGlam paper, which is not directly music related, but really relevant to what was talked about this morning. So I thought I would say a word about it. It's a predictive game-based layered affect model. PreGlam is a system that you plug to your game, and it's going to give valence, arousal, and tension outside of the game for you to use. So we heard already about arousal, valence, and tension. And so the way it works is you get a player that is playing, and there's an audience eventually, and the game data is sent to PreGlam, and PreGlam will send the valence, arousal, and tension curves. And the only thing that the designers have to do is to provide PreGlam with a table that basically map the game event to some base value and modifiers for valence, arousal, and tension. And PreGlam, in a way, is an agent that is a bit like an audience member, except for, he said there is an audience member that is biased toward the player. And if you think about game music, you could have a music that is playing, that is ruling for the enemy. Typically, the music is actually rooting for the player, which in multiplayer games is actually an issue in itself. I won't get into those details. But PreGlam rules for the player, and PreGlam is a little bit omniscient. I think it knows a little bit of the future. For tension, that helps a lot. Like the player would. The player would sort of feel that, oh my God, I'm arriving toward the big boss, right? And so, yeah, so PreGlam knows that and takes that into account. And we did some evaluation studies of PreGlam to show that, so we got a number of users to spectators to play the game so that they get this predictive machine of what the game dynamic is, and then to annotate the emotion of the game with and without music, and with generative music and adaptive music as well. And then we find that it does work in the sense that PreGlam is way closer to the human annotation. It's not exactly like a human, but it gives you some information that is really correlated statistically speaking. Every result I give is statistically significant, when it's quantitative. And so it gives an OK modeling of the way a human audience would perceive the emotion from the game. And here we talk only about perceived emotion, not induced emotion. Induced emotion would involve physiology, and we don't deal with that now. And we don't really want to play with people's physiology anyway. We think it's a private matter. Some people will, so it works, so that's great. And so the idea now is to take PreGlam, put it in a game, and then to see if we can control MMM based on that valence, tension, and arousal. And so we have this forthcoming paper, another forthcoming paper called PreGlam MMM, which is about applying and evaluating affective, adaptive, generative music in video game that we will compare, in fact, with linear music and with adaptive music itself. And so here are the results. And they're sort of interesting in that, so this is the dynamic transform between the annotation of the audience and a random walk here that is very far from the annotation of the audience, and here the PreGlam system. So you see that for linear music, so for no music, we are closer to the annotation of the audience, and that's because PreGlam doesn't listen to the music, in fact. As I described it, it's just looking at the game's event. That's something that is missing there is music listening, machine listening in the PreGlam model. And it works for linear, adaptive, and generative as well. And here you see that the adaptive is a little bit better than the linear, and the generative adaptive is a little bit better than the pure adaptive. Pure adaptive is a composer using Elias or other game engine like WAIC and doing everything manually to do an adaptive track. So points for PreGlam. Here we also did a little bit more qualitative information looking at how people felt. So do you feel the music is more closely, in which case do you feel the music is more closely matching with the game? In which, so that the game play match. emotion match, in which video of the game that you, as a spectator, look, you feel the music is more closely matching the emotion that you perceive from the gameplay, so the emotional match. Immersion, in which video do you feel the most immersed, and then enjoyment. And then we find that no music is, still with sound effects actually, but no music is not good. Linear music works really well, surprisingly, so no correlation with game events. And adaptive music, quite less. And then generative adaptive music is sort of an in-between. And there's explanations for that, but I'm happy to share the paper. Is being submitted at the moment. I won't get into too much details here. The last forthcoming work that I want to mention is the Isovat Corpus, which is a new data set that we're releasing that is a professionally composed corpus of music that is composed by doing, and I want to give credit here to my PhD student, Kale Plutt, who is going to defend soon, early next year, for doing an amazing work in reviewing the literature around music emotion, of which there is many. So many, like we're talking several hundreds, if not thousands of papers of studies on how humans perceive emotion in music or not. And so what we did, instead of looking at studies themselves, we looked at meta-studies and tried to find, so of course there's a lot of contradiction between results. It's a bit of a mess. In general, arousal is perceived pretty well and works pretty well. Tension is a little harder, but works quite well. And valence is a bit of a mess, if I want to say that in terms of emotion perception, what you find in the literature. And what Kale did, and Kale is a professionally trained composer, was a video game composer himself, and a pianist on sailboats for some reason for many years as well. So both a composer, a musician, and a game enthusiast. And so he took this meta study and tried to summarize an affective composition guide. That is, if you want to increase, so it's all relative. If you want to increase the valence in a piece, what would you do? If you want to increase the arousal, what would you do? Or you want to increase the arousal, probably loudness is something to look at. Interval pitch level is something to look at. Melody direction, melody contour are things to look at. So looking at, among the hundreds and hundreds of features and characteristics of music, which one can you reliably play with to manipulate the perceived emotion of that music according to the scientific literature on musicology, music perception, and cognition. So we did that, and we used it to implement adaptive music. And we did adaptive music trying to cover 3 levels per emotion, high, medium, and low, for both valence, arousal, and tension. So that 3 to the power of 3 emotional space. So that would be 27, I guess. Different emotional space, 3 by 3 by 3, yeah. Yeah, and then we compared here the perceived, with human ranker, the perceived order of those high, medium, and level. So that's a documentation in a way, what we call ground truthing of the data set, where we validate the data sets with human annotator. And we did that not 1 time, but we did that 3 times with 3 different methodologies, because there was some complexities in which methodology would be best. Yeah, so that's what we did. So that's one type of real-time online embedded generative system in the case of a video game. Another type of system we heard yesterday, I think it's Chris, Jean-Pierre, that was mentioning working with George Lewis and the Voyager system. And everyone knows the Continuator, which is also a type of musical agents. But musical agents are typically, they need to be online. They need to be in real time. And so that's another reason to do real-time AI generation in a way. So with my students, now associate professor at the Chalmers University of Technology in Sweden, Kiven Tatar, we developed the Masom architecture, which is an agent that can listen to more music than a human can. At least that's how I was pitching it. But concretely, it's an agent that doesn't deal with MIDI, but with audio. We're making a version with MMM now, because I believe MMM has a lot of promise for agents, because you can really play the guitar or the MIDI keyboard and ask MMM, play me the drum, the bass, 2 violin, and a flute. Here we go, in that style. And eventually you can give him MMM pre-knowledge or for example, in jazz, when you have in jazz structure, that the musicians have to follow. So we're going to work on that in the next few years. I have 2 students working on musical agents with MMM, but that was MASOM, and MASOM was audio. So it just segments sounds and listen to sounds and make a massive bank of sound objects that is structured as a self-organized map. For those who know, it's a dimension reduction sort of neural network by Cohen. Not something new, but really convenient. And then on top of that, we have a temporal model that learns temporal sequences. If I watch Xenakis, after this sequence of sound, which sound will I play next? And so we use that system ourselves in actual. None of the sound is working, eh? No.
Because in the start.
Oh, here we go. This one was on my side. This is Ars Electronica, MASOM playing alone. Oh, that didn't work well.
Go back to the presentation.
Where?
It's not open.
Yeah.
No, you're sharing. Just.
I'm sharing already. Okay. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, I'll restart it. But here what's interesting is the agent is synchronized with another visual agent, and there's no way you can make a synchronization between visuals and sound without that technology. So aesthetically speaking, it's interesting. This is in a deep space 8K room at Ars Electronica. This is running 7 days, a few thousand people every day. Etc., etc. And so that's MASOM alone, and electronic arts, obviously, so that's my jam. Yeah, trained on a Turkish composer called Mehmet, who does electroacoustic music and cinematic music in that case, and playing in that style there. But of course, because it's a musical agent, why having the agents play alone? We could have canned that music, made the video offline. It would have taken a lot of time, but we could have done it and play it linearly. What's interesting with agents is to play with them, right? And that's the other project where we have a machine listening module, and of course we feed MASOM basically what the human or the several humans musicians are doing, and MASOM takes into account what he just did, what the musicians are doing, and given all that and my model of the composer that I'm trying to imitate, what should I do next? And so that we did with Kevin Statar here in the center, and myself quite a lot on stage in various places. Remystery here on the left is the one that was helping us with the graphics. A beautiful space, by the way, that I recommend that we play that is in Montreal, the Society for Art and Technology. It's a massive dome. People are lying on the floor. There's 256 speakers. The sounds were moving around, and as the sounds move around, they draw those graphical shapes, so you can really see the musical gestures in front of your eyes. It works for musicians and electroacousticians, as well as for your grandmother and little kids. We have literally everyone being quite fan of the system because of the space has to do a lot with it, I guess, but because of the immersive nature of, we're doing visual music with musical agents. The project is called Revive, and that's, of course, sort of a controversial aspect, because what we were doing is training Masom on dead composers and playing live with them on stage. I always wanted to play with Tudor. There you go. I have examples and videos online, but I'm not sure the sound quality here is what's playing much. So let's do, let's do the newest. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
We can ask questions, of course.
Yeah, maybe because on this particular agent, La Mason, so it's listening somehow. It's, if I rephrase in my own, it would be like an autoencoder. It's a way compressing the information, the different taxonomy of sounds.
Yeah.
Suppose. But then for the generation, is using this base actually.
Yeah.
Right? But what's the model? There's some interaction with the input from the lights. What's the logic?
So you got the sound bank here. Yeah, there's a sound bank here, and then next to it. So this way, the sound bank is a way to discretize the audio, and then each of those nodes is a type of sound, usually a stack of sound, a reservoir, Bertrand would say, of sounds, and that are really, really, really similar. Like, and then the temporal model. So let's say it's a token, right? And the temporal model, when you listen to a CD, you get those little excerpt of sound, grain of sound, if you wish, one after the other. And that's not a sequence of note, it's a sequence of sound. And that's what we learn. You can do Markovian things, you can do factorial, or you can do more complex temporal model. In what you heard is actually, no, it's not a variable order Markov model, it was a factorial. So the factorial is now moving in that sound vocabulary, yeah? Yeah. Exact. So sound on one side and temporality on the other side. But we believe that we can do that with MMM being the model here, and not doing audio, but doing it more in MIDI as well. We'll see.
So just there are the samples of this composer, that the sound he created in his music. And also the style in
the sequence.
The sequence, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like mosaicing somehow.
Exactly. Oh yeah, in the end, it's a total mosaicing system. Absolutely. But it works in real time, and it's in a way bigger than other similar agents, where you can really get the system to listen to 300 CDs of electroacoustic music, and it will absorb everything. And then you can select. So for example, in our show, we change the composer on the fly. First piece, it's I don't know, Tudor. Second piece up, we're going to play with Parmigiani. Yeah. Third piece, we're going to play with Pierre-Henri. And then the sound vocabulary will change, and the model will change, and poof, we're done in a different And then building on top of the Masom architecture, Noto, who is a PhD student in Norway, we just got a best paper at NIME for that. We've been building up because in a sense, there was no control of Masom. It's just listening, you tell it what composer to imitate, and boom, it goes. So we thought it would be nice if in the future, I don't recommend you try right now, but in the future, those musical agents go somewhere, then it's interesting to ask ourselves how to control them and different modes of improvisation. And so here we based our work. Actually, I'm going to play a little video that I think explained it better than I could.
Inspiring is a virtual musical partner for creative brainstorming. The musical agent utilizes corpora as solo instrumental performance corpuses encoded as self-organized maps, and output slices of the corpora as concatenated, remodeled audio sequences. The name Spire Muse is inspired by the notion of growing ideas from a spire. It could be a phrase, a sound object, a rhythmical pattern. Improvisation is like a cultivator for such basic themes. They grow into something more. Research shows that musicians alternating between pulling together and pushing apart.
Yeah, so we based on some of the literature on improvisation. I think Chris yesterday would have been interested, converging, diverging type of playing, and different different ways for improviser to behave. And based on that model, that is based on actual musician, build on up. We also were interested in just simply having control and being able to say to the agent, that's bad, that's good, stop now, things like that, maybe with pedals or stuff like that.
Is an important dynamic that moves improvisation forward. We place these strategies on a continuum ranging from converging to diverging. To stimulate such dynamics, Spire Muse is designed to engage in different interactive behaviors. Shadowing is a close following of the user's input. Mirroring is a stylistic reflection of the input, which could give rise to novelty. Coupling is a more autonomous mode, driven mostly by the agent's internal generative routines. Negotiation is the meeting space where the musical agent trades decision-making with the user. We place shadowing, mirroring, and coupling along an axis ranging from reactive to proactive. Negotiation happens when the system switches between these behaviors, either autonomously or through manipulation by the user. Spire Muse's corpus training is based upon a modified version of the Meson agent architecture and is implemented in mass. The training starts by selecting the corpus folder. First, all of the audio is segmented into slices based on onset detection. Each audio slice is then labeled with a feature vector, in our case, containing 55 features. The self-organizing map creates a two-dimensional latent space through learning the internal relations between all of the feature vectors in the corpus. Each node in the map represents approximations of varying number of input vectors. Every audio slice is then assigned to a node based on a best matching unit function. Hence, similar slices are clustered together at these nodes. Finally, each song in the corpus is encoded as a sequence of song nodes. In runtime, these sequences can be used as models for the factor oracle algorithm, which uses the song nodes to create new sequences of the same style as its source. Shadowing mode is the baseline behavior of the musical agent. In this mode, the agent responds reactively and outputs the closest matching audio slice of the corpus for each onset registered in the input. In mirroring mode, the agent listens to longer phrases and attempts to respond with similar phrases. It builds a list of closest song matches based on audio slices from the input stream. A KV tree algorithm finds the closest matching song subsequence among the listed songs encoded as song sequences. A factor oracle of the song containing the matching subsequences is initiated. In coupling mode, the user is coupled to a factor oracle which plays back continuously. The agent listens to the user and attempts to align with the input by intermittently loading new factor oracles from other songs in the corpus, or by jumping to new states within the same factor oracle. The agent's choices of songs to load into the factor oracle is based on tempo and chrono transition matrix matching. The negotiating interface functions as a counterweight to the agent's automated behaviors. Functions include forcing it back to its previous modes, pausing it, or changing its state.
And I think here you get Noto on one side and then the agent on the other side. He worked with a number of artists. I'm going to pass here. You get the idea. And in fact, while MMM, I think, is really the bomb, I wouldn't recommend you spend too much time playing with Spire Muse the same way that Omax and Protect and all those things, you know, they're nice one time, but you're not necessarily going to come home and be like, oh my God, I really want to play with that agent again, right? But, you know, it's research, so why not? And in terms of embedded generation, that's another example. We also have some more commercial applications. Some alumni of the lab created a company. They have this Allo application, which will generate personalized soundscapes and ambient music, depending on your goal. And it's going to learn from you day after day. So you start the app, you choose if you want to sleep, relax, meditate, or work, creative focus. And then there's a number of parameters you adjust. And then you give feedback at the end of the experience to the system, and the system starts learning what works for you, if it's efficient or not. Eventually, they have the aim to couple that with, you know, a watch that give you your galvanic skin response, heartbeat, and things like that to see if it actually works, and try to really have this sort of feedback where the system start generating things that are conducive to really put a particular user in a particular state at a particular time. So I'll stop for here for music. We do it for movement as well. Similarly, because style limitation is movement, and we're interested in movement because it's related in a way at the computational level to music. There is horizontal dependencies, vertical dependencies, in that you can move your arms independently away from each other, but not too much either, because they're attached to your body. And also multimodal neural networks and multimodal learning we're interested in. This is a neural network dancing on generative music. All right. And we do generative music video because we need music. We just got a good exhibition in Istanbul, actually, of some of our pieces there, but I switched there. I just wanted to say a few words because it's already been 45 minutes about evaluation, because we're all concerned with the evaluation of those problems. How good are those systems? How are they perceived? We talked about it a little bit, but the truth of the matter is that it's much more complicated because it's creative tasks. And there's an art world out there. And we many times in our conversation, we're like, well, what about, and here a lot of people have both arts, of being both an artist and a scientist. But we know as people who have both art that not everyone does. And it will take some convincing. Sometimes some convincing of ourselves. You know, when I'm saying as the author of Massums that I'm not going to play with it every day, but I can, you know, make a performance if I work hard with the agent, you know, but it's going to be a lot of work, probably more work than having a third person on stage, really. But, you know, that's the way it is. The truth of the matter is you get at least those 7 dimensions of evaluation that I've been isolating. You got, of course, ourselves, the author, the designer, the artist, the friends, informal evaluation. You know, you don't release an artwork if you're not happy about it. You know, that's sort of the basics for it. And then users, peers, experts, other composers, sound designers, the audience, of course, you know, popularity. The data bots, they use neural network to generate heavy metal. It really sounds bad, but, you know, they have millions of followers. So that's that it is, and they can book concerts, album sales, the media, the critics, the journal, and then eventually curators, peer reviewers, people inviting you into festivals, artistic grants. So they're not scientific evaluation, but they're already more formal evaluation, right? And I believe they matter, because if you don't get grants, for example, as an artist in media art, before NFTs, it was really hard to make any money because nobody cares, really. Same in contemporary music. You know, if you rely on ticket sale, it's going to be difficult. You know, I've been to Xenakis retrospective concerts.
Especially during COVID.
Yeah, right. And COVID broke it really hard, right? Even before, yeah. You know, when you spend $120,000 to train an ensemble to play some Xenakis, and then there's 35 people showing up at the concert, that's a lot of money per ticket. And then you got formal scientific academic evaluation, theoretical analytic measures without humans and empirical studies, be they quantitative or qualitative. So at the lab, we've really been working on those evaluation systems, but it's hard, and it's hard for many reasons. There's no notion of optimality because it's a creative task. So subjective, cultural, judgmental impression. I'm sure in this room, we all love music, but we might love different music. And it's good, because otherwise there would be only one type of music. If we all love the same type of music, if we all agreed on good music, then that would be sad. And it's multidimensional, and framing can play a role. A lot of people, they like the music, not because of the music. They like the music because of the history of that music, the cultural norms around that music, the personality of the artist, sometimes the physique of the artist, believe it or not, etc., etc. So we've been doing some actual experiment about, as well, the perception of machine-generated music. And there's at least 4 experiences that have been done regarding the bias against computational creativity. If you tell people, which I don't for my electronic music, by the way, when we press records, it's been a long time, we make hours and stuff, the plays in club, nobody knows it's not made by a human. Is it ethical? I don't know, but we were afraid that if we told people, they would reject it. They would not like it as much. So is it the case? There was already anecdotal evidence. I don't know if you all know the story of David Cope when he started doing pretty solid music generation, at least. I don't know, I'm not a classical musician, so I can't tell about the quality, but it sounded pretty solid. And he wanted to hire an orchestra to play the music. No orchestra would want it to take the money. People were like, there is no way we play computer-generated music. You know, it's going to ruin our reputation, and stuff. So there was controversy. So we went formal and made some experiments, not alone. There's 5 experiments published, 4 experiments published so far, 1 submitted, 2 of them by our group. And the result, unfortunately, is we don't really have any results so far, despite a lot of effort and a lot of things. It seems to depend. I have this theory that it depends how much the audience, what the level of computational literacy is. In other words, people who understand what it is to program a computer and understand that when you do generative music, you actually spend more time than a normal musician or composer programming the computer, and it's a lot of work, independently of the results. And also then people who really understand the processes around it would be more accepting, but we'll see. So around evaluation, we did develop a number of evaluation tools really there, but here again, it's complex. Theoretical reason I mentioned, practical reasons as well. The choice of corpus. Some algorithm would work really well with a corpus, not at all with another one. I wouldn't want to feel, by respect for Brazil, I wouldn't want to feed Brazilian music to Mason, for example. I don't think it's a good idea, Choice of parameters, because those are highly parametric systems, the sweet spots, the artist has to do with that, and it's complicated. Choice of the sample output. Yeah, those systems are generative systems. They can create ad infinitum. Surely some of the generation are going to be genius, most of them not. Depending on the sample you choose to evaluate on, it's going to change. The choice of creative process. As I said with the song AI, you give similar system to 30 different bands, they're going to use it in 30 different ways. And so that's complicated to factor in. And of course, the problem of the interface, the user experience, usability, all that really does matter. So that's it. Nonetheless, we believe it's important, this research on creative AI, and I won't tell you that here necessarily because you all know about it. There's a serious scientific interest in, if only for modeling, what is creativity? Can we understand it? If we can understand it, can we make models of it? Jean-Pierre, I think, has been saying enough that, if we can't make it, we probably don't understand it. And therefore, there's now applied research in terms of the industry starts to see applications in the video game, in synthesizer maker, music software maker. And in terms of aesthetic and artistic practice, it is literally a new type of practice. Generative art is on the rise. $2.7 billion worth of money were thrown into NFTs in the last 8 months. It's the largest amount of transfer of wealth towards art in the history of humankind. Booming in every direction, industry, research, artistic practice, it's happening. Of course, I wanted to put that slide here that I had because we mentioned it today. Of course, there's people that are reticent. Fair enough. It's scary. It can be scary, especially when you don't have the knowledge. Fear and absence of knowledge all sort of come together. And so that's not new. When physical automation was on the rise, there was serious pushback. In fact, even in the music industry, when musicians were replaced into cinema, you would see the American Federation of Musicians buying ads like that in the Syracuse Herald, where you have a record player that is basically kicking a musician out of the theater and is considered as a tyrant for art. And making musical scenes, right? A robot grinding up musical instruments in 1930, But the truth here is that creative practice nowadays is typically part of the computerization of society. It's been systematic, it's been brutal, it's hard to make art without computers. It's still possible and encouraged, but at any time, if you want to release an album, you're going to need a computer at some stage nowadays, and you can do it in group, in bigger group, or in very big group, and then it looks more and more like a click factory, right? So in the end, I'm a believer that of the symbiosis between technology and humans. I strongly believe in anthropocentric instrumentalism. I think this room has not to be convinced about the debate between strong AI and sentient machine, which we don't have and don't have any idea if we will ever have, and automatizing specific tasks. In other words, anthropocentric instrumentalism is this idea that we design the tools we feel we need, and the tool that we feel people want. Anything else would be a bit of counterproductive. But it's true that the computational society has been brutal, it's been systematic, it has many implications, and now we can see those implications for the creative industries, and that's just the beginning of it. But I believe that we can harness the power of machine to expand and support our creativity. So yeah, co-creativity. And that's my students and colleagues here at the Metacreation Lab, that of course without them, nothing would ever happen. And I wanted to do a shout out to Cadence.com. Cadence is an online MOOC that is dedicated to the art. You can learn guitar, piano, art history, fashion history from Paris, processing and P5GS from NYU. Stanford is teaching Max. I'm teaching generative art and computational creativity. 2 courses there. They're free for the first one, and the second one, you send me an email and I'll give you a code to get it for free. I also wanted to mention the AI music creativity community and the new AI music creativity conference. Bob Sturm, myself, and a number of other researchers have started that conferences 2 years ago. It's going to run its 3rd edition next year in Japan. It's not announced yet, but it will happen. And there's a journal of simulation of musical creativity that is getting off the ground slowly. We'll see how that goes. I also give various tutorials in places. I have a 4-hour, 8-hour, and a 32-hour version of a music AI tutorial. And I'm also involved in the ACM Movement and Computation Conference. I want to thank my funding buddies, and thank you all for your attention.
Questions? Philippe.
Yes, Philippe.
Yes, Philippe.
No, just to say it's fantastic work, and a very direct question: how to manage interdisciplinarity without losing the different areas, and without getting so much into the shallow part, because I see that the words are quite deep. And my question is, what hint would you give to a young professor that's trying to navigate the interdisciplinary without losing it?
Yeah, well, it really depends, because it has to do with context. Sometimes it's well accepted, sometimes it's complicated. I don't know the context here. I could give you advice to get tenured in Canada, but I'm not sure if those advice would work to get tenured in Brazil, right? Unfortunately, there's no universal there. I believe you got to be opportunistic, you got to read the map. So that's more like a practical answer, but in theory, if done well, interdisciplinary is always a win-win, right? Because the First Nation people in Canada always say, never about us without us. And this idea that we would do computer music without musicians or composers, for example, it just means it's going to fail. So, if you do it with interdisciplinarity, then you're going to succeed. And that is the motivation. Now, I'm not sure about how to manage. The rest is after that: team building, team management, and how much support you can get, and things like that. We're lucky that I'm in a department that is really promoting and build, from the ground up that way. And we equip all of our students with serious research methodology. That is, people coming from humanities learn quantitative methods. People coming from quantitative approach learn qualitative methods. Computer scientists have to learn empirical studies and qualitative methods so that they understand what humans are and how we deal with humans, which then makes them better computer scientists. And so the idea is the interdisciplinarity should be built in such that it serves everyone, right? So it should be one of those win-win situation, of course, right? Like any other sort of collaboration. But when it comes to the quality of the research, it also makes a difference. You do something about, for example, music video generation without ever talking to someone that makes music video for a living, you miss a massive opportunity, right? And you probably just go into a dead end to later on find out that, yeah, you know, that was wrong, and now I got to restart at the beginning again.
As we were already discussing, is there a general elements that you can formulate for different modalities in co-creative or creativity, co-creativity? Are there a general statement that you can apply, for example, for music, for games, for dance, or...
Oh, yeah. Okay, so that's another part of your question. Why in my lab we don't focus just on music? Yeah. Well, yeah, I believe in breadth a little bit. While it's important to be in depth in some project, yeah, they also there, you know, move each other. And there's a scientific interest in trying to see if those creative processes that we try to understand, eventually try to partially automate, if there's any commonality there, because that would make sense. And that would be convenient. So there's you know, a fundamental aspect of trying to go multimodal and see if there's, and often you find that you can do knowledge transfer, but not just the knowledge transfer of neural networks, but actual knowledge transfer within a team, within a group, and all that. And that's one way to sort of guarantee novelty and successful research, in the sense that very often what happens is that if you stay in computer music and you read all of computer music, and the space is a bit saturated and the big trends are there, you're going to increment, right? But if you look into like generative choreography, what they do about like long forms, and then you're like, oh, you know what? That gives me an idea about forms in music and musical forms, right? And then all of a sudden, it's a way also to gain inspiration and to do those type of knowledge transfer.
Thank you.
I just want to say that this is really impressive. I didn't know that your team and your lab worked on so much sites, and congratulations, because I think it's really difficult to keep up, I believe. So I had two little questions, a bit more technical questions in fact. The first one is the control for MMM. So you showed us a slide about the control that you can apply with this model. I was wondering how does this work exactly? I guess that it's some kind of rule-based sampling function during regeneration.
No, it's conditioning. The neural network loads, yeah. So we add token. For example, we have a token. So, you know, we analyze our alpha million MIDI composition, and we determine the time signature. Then we add a token from time signatures. We have 132 time signatures, which is way too many. So we reduced it to 32, I think, which sort of makes sense for us, so that people can do time signatures that correspond to Latin music and not just 4/4 and things like that. And then we have the token in the data where we train, and after that, yeah, we just condition that way. And we do that for all the controls I've shown you. Yeah.
Okay. I think I looked through this.
Yeah. And the whole trade-off is to manage the number of tokens, right, versus the size of your network.
Okay. Oh, it's really interesting. I guess it was a sampling function during the generation, token after token, analyze by no.
No, it is in the encoding.
Okay.
I'll check. It's a balance between noise and
Maybe the one at the back. Yeah.
Yes, because
Yeah.
So conditioning is only done with tokens?
Yeah.
Okay. And did you thought about using some embedding mergings, maybe to add a sense of control, maybe by merging, embedding the input of the model to somehow inject information about the style or the tension?
No, same for everything. For tension, for style, we tokenize it. Yeah. And so our adventure is to try to grow that data set and the metadata that comes with it. But right now we have 10 million matching of those 500,000 songs. We have matched them to 10 million audio recording because many songs have different recording, both in the Brain music database, but also in the Spotify database. So you have access to the audio that correspond to those songs if you want to. And Spotify has like a list of features that is incredible and is human crowdsourced, right? So it's pretty good quality as well, the Spotify feature there. And same with the Music Brain, there's so many features. So we just use those features. And again, it's just a trade-off, but we believe that, but again, with the Moore's law and seeing that, in 1 or 2 years, and that's why we're not doing distillation of the network, because it's 6 layers, but maybe a 4-layer network would work the same. We don't know, because we actually didn't try.
Yeah, this is my second question, actually.
Yeah.
You said that you were embedding your model MMM into some keyboards or I don't know, so some other equipment, and it has 20 billion parameters.
Yeah.
So, like you said, how do you manage to make it work?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Also, low resource hardware environment.
For generation, it's pretty easy. For training, we're in Canada, so we have Compute Canada. So we work on stacks of GPUs that have no end. Yeah.
So 20 million parameters is fits on some of these systems.
Yeah. Or in terms of generation, yeah, the model is not that big. It's a couple. I actually don't know. It's like a 32 megabyte or something like that.
What is the embedding size of the model?
I don't know. What do you mean by embedding size?
The size of all the embedding vectors.
Like the binary, like the matrix, the weight?
Not the weight, the size of the vectors. When you have a sequence of tokens,
yeah,
you convert the tokens into an embedding vector.
I don't even know. You have to ask Jeff.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Yeah, but we literally didn't touch much of the Hugging Face vanilla version, so it would be probably close to what they use by default there. And we tried a bunch of variations because it's like Transformers is a big family now, and we never got any improvement out of it. Plus, we find that the system really works. So for now, for good, but it's just the beginning. So we're going to look at all sorts of, and we are looking at all sorts of variations and ways to work it. So for example, right now in the system, because of MIDI, the drum is like one track, which is not satisfying. If you really want to do computer-assisted composition of percussion, you don't want the drum to be one track with all the instruments on one track. You want to separate the instruments, which we did already for this synthesizer. There's a bass drum track, a snare track, hi-hat track, and other percussions track, and you divide it, and then you have to pass the data. And then you're in a nightmare where nobody encodes the drum the same way in MIDI, and then so it's a lot about messaging the data, but in terms of vertical, temporal dependencies and conditioning, it's all the transformer. No, yeah, it's just magic. As was explained earlier, if it's complex enough, it's undiscoverable for magic. I myself encourage people to try it for themselves and to load. I have people working with like contemporary music in it, people, and to play with it and see for yourself.
It's on the web. It's on the web. I've tried it.
Oh yeah, you tried it.
It's on
yeah.
the web. Yes.
Yeah, the version on the web has less control. Yeah.
Tracks and I just did.
Yeah.
It sounds very simple, but people can.
Yeah.
You didn't release the code, I believe.
Sorry?
You didn't release the code.
Did we release the code? We released the data set, and no, I don't think we released the code. Jeff is still, and in fact, we didn't publish. We published and archived the paper, and that's because literally we're selling it to a bunch of companies as well. So it's funding things, right? So yeah, there is that for sure. But eventually, it's going to be released, and there's also alternative, like the guy who contacted you. Because apparently Nathan's get people being like, hey, I'm doing the MMM implementation, and because Nathan knows about those things, he's getting asked about it. So there's a number of people that try to re-implement it. But yeah, I'm actually talking with lawyers and people to see what we should do with it. They want me to start a company. I don't want to start a company. So we're having arguments. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Just, I can just say about the story because Nathan will present now and
Yep.
and started very recently. And mostly was this whole project to work on multi-track because it's true that most of generation deep learning based or based system are just working on melody and chords or melody and chords and drums. That's it.
Or piano rolls.
And,
Yeah.
Or piano roll. And so, yes, but it's basically it's fixed. And then we discovered that we were doing some project and you did something very interesting. And but I have a corollary question. Well, actually, no, it's not a question. It's a comment. So it's very impressive that I mean personally I believe in conditioning and not just for legal deep learning, but far off. But it's then you have like almost 10 now. I mean, so it means the combinatorial is huge because of course it's geometric. It means that in training, for training you need a lot of GPU and a lot of time because you need to have some kind of sample, representative sample of all the combinations with all the conditioning factors. Actually. So this is, but this works.
Yeah, and then some of the problem with those parameters is that the parameter space is so big, is a problem for training, but that's okay because we have those supercomputers. But it's for generation, and so for example, Steinberg, they are like, we want like our composers would want full control, but they're like, no, never give full control because beginners will use the full control even if they don't understand it, and this combination of those parameters that won't really work because there's some instruments that. In the data set, there's not example of someone playing you're playing a 6 voice of polyphony on a flute. You don't do that. So if you ask that, the system is gonna
But no, you could have some kind of filtering system. Very simple to just exclude the things which.
So we thought interfacing would be very simple, and when you talk to the industry, then you realize it's a nightmare. It's really complicated, and they're so careful on releasing any change of little feature because they know that people, especially the enthusiasts, that the ones that are gone. So there are 4 groups of users. They have the composers, they got the tech enthusiasts, early adopters, they got beginners, and they got another one that I forget. And it really matters because the tech enthusiasts are the ones that are going to buy it, use it only once to write stuff online and to do stuff, never really use it after that, but they're going to try everything. And as soon as it doesn't work, especially with those black box system, then suspicion is there, trust is broken, it's over. So you gotta be very careful. It's complicated, but this is the first time since I started. Well, it's not true. I had fun with my SOM. I had fun before. I always have a system to have fun with, but this is a system I had the most fun with, as in doing stuff that I couldn't do. It takes me less than an hour to make a good track with that system, and it takes me a lot more time with that. And so it's funny because I'm a busy man, and if I can, at 10 p.m. stop working, and then at 11 p.m. and have a new track, I'm like, yes, I'm happy. And as was said this morning, the important part is the happy part. I play with the synthesizer. He makes the pattern for me, which entering the pattern in the synthesizer is a nightmare. It's, again, so much clicking and stuff like that. So if you know what you want, you know what you like, you use the system, you prime it with stuff that you already like, and it's going to follow along. And after that, I spend my time playing, which is what I like. Yeah.
Actually, just doing that. If you could come back to the song, in the song context.
Oh, yeah. Can we play that? Yeah.
After, let's answer to the question first.
Sure.
And show a bit of it and explain the process.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the other thing that I'd never explained, but that would be long and stuff, is how we did the generative music in the game. Because we had a composer generating the stems, and we had the system being, okay, for each of those stems, we make the 27 variation with different valence and arousal automatically. So the composer has aesthetic control, the system makes the variety. So it allows us to have like really quickly to have 7 variations of each of the 27 things. So that's like, I don't know, 600 different stems, and the combinatorics with the transition between them. So we use the system to make transitions between each. And the entire combinatorics is in the paper is 30 trillion possible arrangements. Well, when you're a composer, well, you know, that's it. And that is the reason why the generative system is better than the adaptive music made by a composer. It's not because the music is better, it's because the transitions have been made specifically for each transition. So there's no weird transition. Well, if you do it manually as a composer, you won't have the time to compose all the transitions. You can't.
You have to use skinny SPL.
Absolutely.
30 trillion of automata and just 5
Yeah.
lines of code.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm interested in putting Bertrand in touch with this game engine company, because for them, it seems that it's a good idea. For adaptive game, I can see how that would be a good idea. Yeah.
First, I would like to say that I admire your work.
Sorry?
Yeah.
Oh.
You admire.
I admire
You do, too.
your work.
We're very impressed.
Oh.
Yeah, exactly. Because you are right at the exception of the disconnection of academia in the real world. And through you, many projects in artistic value and technical development, etc.
Well, let me just start by returning the compliment, because I'm a big fan of what you guys are doing and what you've been saying. Yeah, it's been fantastic so far, and it's great to meet you all. And there's definitely a lot of talent in the room.
But I would continue with this. I after the compliment, I see that you are like in a strategic point position. Like a group, and you have a vision of a whole group. Which one to talk to is like how it's good for you to talk with that company. I would like to put you in contact with somebody. And the question, the second part, the question is if you have a strategy for the growth of a community around the projects. If you want to share this kind of thing. Because it's really important for anyone who is developing technology to learn how to do this. It's really hard to accomplish, not only to develop, but to accomplish people who actually make use of all the systems, and to get a community around something, and maybe you have lessons too in this direction. And the third part, that I think we are really aligned with this posture of being in contact and wanting to develop systems that people will actually use. And so the third part is how to collaborate more with you and your group, because I think we have many lessons to learn with you.
Well, you know, let's open a channel. I'm interested in collaboration and cooperation. So yeah, absolutely. And I think the same of you, like Jaber, yourself, you know, you had some industrial experience, you've been on the ground, you know where it is, you have musical experience, etc., etc. So I think there's a good alignment here, I agree. In Canada, we have money, there's MidiTok. I didn't check if they do Brazil, but I think they do, because I had Guilherme from Recife. He was an undergrad student in design coming just before COVID. He ended up locked into a background apartment in Burnaby, and then he was kicked out of the country. It was a nightmare. But anyhow, there's money in Canada, and we can work on exchanges of students, which is always great for them. So yeah, let's. I mean, I don't have all the ideas now, but let's keep the communication open and try to cook something. I have to say that the idea of coming back to Brazil is not something that repulses me. You know, I'm actually, you know, if there's opportunity to come to Brazil, I probably say yes, and I think my students will be in the same posture, and projects can flow from there. For the first part of the community, I think I'm pretty bad community organizers, but I've been doing my best. I did the musical meta creation workshop for 10 years, and now we have this AI music creativity conference. But more generally, right now, and as everyone knows here, research is not just about excellence; it's also about impact. And I'm not good on social media, and don't have a lot of followers on Twitter. So I just hired actually a communication coordinator. So hopefully, with that help, we might grow a little bit of a community and solidify a community around those issues. But I think other than that, it's really moving really fast in the world right now, and those communities are really growing. But in Canada, in Vancouver, I'm a little bit isolated. It's not NYU, it's not New York, it's not LA, it's not Paris with YACAM. We don't have that critical mass. And I feel even you guys, have a little bit with Mystic and stuff. You got like a sort of a critical mass. Like in America, unfortunately, usually a lab is a professor. Right, they didn't get the memo about teamwork. I don't know. So it's a bit. That's one of the things. I'm really happy. I'm not gonna criticize Canada. I'm really happy to be both French and Canadian. But definitely that's something that I struggle with. So I think I have as much to learn from you guys than anything else at that level. Yeah.
Really well.
Yeah, welcome.
Thanks.
Next one.
So, thank you. No, so yeah, if you could show quickly, the song and just again say a little bit behind
the process. Yeah.
Yeah, behind the process, not necessarily everything, but
Yeah.
The result is interesting. That's also, of course.
Yeah, let's listen. Yeah, let's listen to it and see. So it's Kel, who is a composer who primed the system, the MMM system, and generated all that. And then he used an online system to generate lyrics that you're going to hear in a second, and a pretty awful vocoder or text-to-speech singing. Singing, for some reason, is really hard. Like voice generation is pretty advanced now, like fake voices work really well, and no one can do singing. But that's interesting. And do the singing with that vocoder. And he's a great composer, and he really simplified everything. So I'm not surprised we didn't win. But it's Californian rock, trying to be catchy. Listen to it. So to his defense, it was made during COVID, in isolation, and he was on his own. But he's a good musician, and what he does, same with the game music, when it's generated, he actually plays it. He plays it half tempo, because at that time we didn't have the velocity in the system, and of course there's no macro timing because of the MIDI and the quantization, which is, I think Jabba was talking about, a big avenue of research is rhythm in general, but also interpretation and all that. So he play the parts when they're generated manually, half speed, and then accelerate, and do the arrangement into Ableton using as professional of tools and instruments as he can, with his limited budget in this case. Yeah, some of the entries were much more polished with like actual studio working on it and proper situation. And that's what's sad about, not sad, but it's an AI song contest. Yeah. So you got to have lyrics, which is really a problem because make an AI sing right now, exactly. Good luck.
The device is mute.
Yeah.
What's too bad the Japanese are using to simulate voice. There is this huge virtual performance
Yeah.
The vocal lead, yeah, I know this. We see that's the cultural nature of music. You got entire population who love that stuff. I mean, this is Californian rock from, like, he would qualify better than me the style he was looking for, but there's a crowd for that. There's people who love that stuff, right? It's just, that's the way it is. That's music for you, right? Yeah, it's not just a waste of time. It sounds like, to me, it sounds like garbage, but it turns out there's people who would pay to go see that show, you know? Yeah, that's the world we live in, everyone. Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
How much time do you the last session, and as it's a more technical
A bit more
presentation. Nathan is starting. I'm also the responsible. Well, actually, Nathan selected his own
I can help
topic
you.
himself, so actually I'm not the only one guilty. But as a there's a strong connection with NMN, actually, as we will see.
Yeah, I'm interested in I missed the presentation at Disney, so I'm interested.
Nathan is will focus on the issue of representation, which is a very something as
Juste pour la correction, c'est marqué. c'est
Pas
là.
Philippe Calagari.
oui.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tomorrow we'll do that.
With a technical issue, I can open my mailbox. Get the link.
Because as you know, representation is fundamental.
The link is
For learning, for
a couple of character
computers,
form. If you want to
for
type
music,
it.
and also it's non.
It's StreamYard.com.
It's everything. Every representation buys.
It's like
so every
HN
somehow you just got the
W
crazy idea
C
for the back
VA
version with the scores.
D
Just
3
to
F
have the pixel, you know, in order to be more, somehow basically raw representation. Not, yeah.
Okay.
Let's use it.
StreamYard. Yeah,
Yeah,
with
the
the
score
white.
and make the system generate the rest of the score. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And,
Yeah, now you.
because somehow it's
Okay.
it's a way to get rid of all this
I
issue.
don't
We use how to represent time, how to represent etc. So it's because in vision, if you start with pixel, it's already some representation. It's because that's the main that's one of the main advantages of deep learning. It starts with very raw representation. It doesn't need expertise to make so somehow.
And
As soon as we use MIDI, etc., it's already when you use raw signal.
Represent the sound.
Yes.
itself.
Okay.
Like in a,
You need to share screen? Yes.
would be a small sample, but
hey, sorry, do you need
No issues.
Nathan is represented about the embedding, the way that. But so Nathan is ready. So from Ellipsis and Obey, because this is a PhD story joint with the CIF. You know the CIF. It's a joint industry and academy PhD project with Obey, with a big software development company. I'm not doing it, they are not working and actually.
So that's not.
But they are more for working on public, software for more like
Yes.
big projects.
Into
But they created some kind of structure within Obey who's trying to, to be the front line and to have some vague, I don't know how to say very, survey,
Let me see here.
and to get some,
we'll get to it.
to fund some little projects, some visuals and some kind of, not pretending to use immediately or at least immediately, but to see the things which are trendy.
Okay.
It's a fashion. Yeah.
Say something went wrong. Okay. So more into
Yeah.
Europe.
The right thing. Use it low. Are you connected to the internet? That internet? Yeah.
Sorry about this.
No,
A little bit
no,
technical.
it's we have to thank again Mauricio, etc. to make it work.
You have
Safari doesn't work. Firefox should work, I believe.
It should work. Okay. Maybe open a private tab and test it out. Maybe check your problems. Something like that. I think your photo is wrong.
Wi-Fi is not that good.
It's not really good.
Yeah. Okay.
No, but I think the link was wrong.
Okay.
We have
Still
another
loading.
game. So if you wanna, you can. And then here, well, you don't have this entry, right? Okay, that
And you know what? I will restart it.
What?
Because it's not normal. I can even restart. Oh, okay. Okay. No, something is wrong. Kind of freezing. Okay.
No, it's okay. If it restarts quickly,
Okay.
but we might take it.
This one is encrypted, so it'll take a little more.
Oh, okay. If things like that, you have a different cable. You might want to use.
Okay, so this one died.
The power part?
Second here. Okay, I have it.
I have it. Yeah, maybe private cable. The internet is bad. Yeah. The internet is bad.
Okay, sorry for the glitch. The internet, the Wi-Fi was going down. Just realized
Okay, I need to open something before.
back to cable TV.
Oh, you can share the screen first.
No, just to prepare.
Ah, okay. I won't be showing the screen too.
Okay, so hello everyone. Sorry for the little technical issue. So my presentation will be a little bit more technical than the previous one, and but not so technical. You can calm down. There's only 2 equations, I believe, so it's okay. And maybe a little more theoretical, in fact. In fact, it won't even be towards the music generation. It's not the final goal, but you will see. So I'm a PhD candidate at Lipsis with Jean-Pierre, which is my PhD supervisor. And so I don't have all the pedigree and the experience from Jean-Pierre, Franck, Philippe, Jordan, everyone else. So this will be a presentation of what I've done so far in the last months, and of the early research and what I intend to do to make science go forward. So at first, I wanted to talk a little more about what one should do when you are designing a generative model. But in fact, Hubert and Jordan also talked about this, and better than me. So this is what I put. Use a GBR design framework where you want to create a generative model. So no, in fact, I wanted to say first thing is to fix yourself the objectives and the constraints that you have. Just think about it, then design your model. Just explore what you can do, and then update your objectives and constraints. So the objective and constraints will in fact be what JR would call the machine's contribution and the user's contribution, but there are a lot of them in fact. Maybe some of them that JBR didn't mention is the music format and representation. This is something that will depend on the data that you have, because symbolic music datasets are not there are not much datasets on the internet, so we don't have a lot of choice. And another one which is really important, I believe, and wasn't even mentioned from now, is performance. So the use cases. In fact, there are lots of use cases. I will not detail every every use case, but music generation system can be employed to a lot of things. So it has to be completed. This is something you have to think about. And then types of neural networks. So once again, there are a lot of types of neural networks. I will not detail how every one of them works. So there are autoencoder, now variational autoencoder, which are better, recurrent neural networks, convolutional, GANs, graph neural networks, reinforcement learning, diffusion networks, and etc., etc. And the last one, transformer, which is kind of a state of the art nowadays. So this is the basic options that you can have today. And maybe also to consider the musical format. So just like I said, the format that your data is, so sheet music, just like standard image. So this is a format of data, even though nobody uses sheet music like images to generate music. I've never seen any model generate direct images of sheet music. I don't know if it's even possible. There is also the MIDI audio, and in the middle it's music XML. Okay, so the last one is the performance. This is, to me, it's very important. It's the computer scientist who is talking right now, because to me it has to be anticipated from the beginning to make it work. So first, what is your hardware to train a model? Do you have a GPU? How many GPU? The memory, the capacity. This is really important. Not that if you don't have a high-end GPU, tens of GPUs, you won't be able to do something good. In fact, you can do very simple things without any neural network. In fact, like Bertrand showed us. But this is important to know, to measure the dimension of the model and to maybe anticipate how efficient it will be. Second, hardware on which the model will run. Of course, this has to be thought. So that's why I asked them.
Oh, you asked for this. Okay.
Qualification.
Qualification. So your PC, well, it doesn't have a screen itself. So you have to have your own screen, so typically an iPad. So the model runs on the app in the iPad.
Oh, okay.
Not on the
Okay.
So in a way, this is a beautiful synthesizer. You can do everything on the synthesizer.
Okay, just a controller.
There's a beautiful graphical interface so you can do something.
Okay, great. I understand better now. Yeah, it could have been possible, in fact, I believe, but
I don't understand why you asked to see it.
yes. Yeah, in fact, if you want to run models, deep learning models on embedded devices like this,
this is engineering as a designer, they have the observation that everyone has a screen already.
It's a little maybe Philippe will explain better.
It's a little synthesizer.
Okay. Anyway, also our task should be run. You have to anticipate this so that the user experience is good. You don't want when you build a system, you don't want it to be too slow, of course, because it has to be interactive and fast, so that the musician or composer enjoy the interactivity and not only enjoy but adopt the product. And last thing, what input and output size should the system handle, should be capable to handle. So I'm talking about does it have to handle 2 minutes of music? For instance, I give it 2 minutes of music and it will output a different version and this kind of thing. So I will not. At first, I wanted to do a quick presentation of each type of neural network, but I think it will has been boring. Jean-Pierre is saying yes. No, it's true. It's true. It's true. And it's not even the theme of the workshop. So
no, and I think you should focus on your
yes, of course. But the theme of the talk was actually from models to music representation. But in fact, I don't know. I didn't know where to begin with the models. So this is why I talk about this small introduction. So what I like to do, what I did for now is to classify neural networks into two categories. This is a little bit naive and categorical. In reality, it's not as simple as this. But to me, you can classify types of neural networks and architectures into two categories. The first one being the sequential models. So by sequential, I mean autoregressive. In fact, you are predicting one step at a time, depending on the previous one, or sometimes not the previous, but the following. It depends. So in this category, you'll find transformers, recurrent neural networks, but also reinforcement learning in some cases. I'm not an expert in reinforcement learning, so
it's fine.
Yes.
Sequential decision.
And so these models are much more suited for interactivity, in fact, as they are content-based. You have to feed them content like notes or text. This is not something that you push on the button and it creates everything. Whereas what I call one-shot generation is, for instance, multi-layer perceptrons, but also autoencoders in some way, but GANs also, in some way also. Anyway, to me, these models are more suited for demonstration to show to people, okay, this is the things that we can do nowadays with generative adversarial networks, but also in co-creativity, maybe for sampling. Sampling is a practice which musicians do in some. It's true in some types of music. Sampling is everywhere. So this model can be used for sampling, I believe. Even though, yes, it could be. Why not? People already did this. So in fact, we will more focus on sequential music representation. So for the models, the sequential models like RNNs or transformers, because to me it's in fact this is the models I'm working on, and especially transformers. So to use these models, the first task is what's called tokenization. So these sequential models were first used for text, in fact, for text modeling, question answering, or machine translation. So the idea is that you input a sequence of words, and you ask the model to do some task, some text generation, classification, question answering, whatever. So what needs to be done is to convert every input of the model, of the sentence here, John and Grant are, into a number, an integer, something that the model will understand. Because you can just feed the model John, the model just don't understand. So I wrote two little equations. So P to X, okay. In fact, for tokenization, we use what's called a vocabulary. So vocabulary is in fact just a simple lookup table which link every word, every element of the input to an integer. And this integer is called a token. So this is the goal of the vocabulary. And so a piece of music, as for text, can be considered as a sequence of events, so a sequence of notes. And so we can ask ourselves, how can we transform and convert music into sequences of tokens so that we can feed music to this kind of neural networks and to generate music, or not only generate, but to do some music information retrieval task also on symbolic music. So, just not the right order for the slide. What I wanted to say also is that, in fact, what you see here, John and Great R, you're not actually feeding the model with an integer, just a number. In fact, you are feeding the model with what's called an embedding vector. The embedding vector is a vector of the dimension that which is an hyperparameter, which represents an object, an item. For instance, here you have cat, kitten, dog, houses, and when you represent these vectors onto here a two-dimensional plane, you can see that embedding vectors of close meaning yes are closer than others. So, for instance, cat and kitten are really close here, and houses is far from the other. And you can do, in fact, you can do also. So like below, you see a king minus man plus woman equal queen. This is the kind of property of embedding vector that is really interesting and which make NLP nowadays NLP techniques able to understand documents, sentences, and to do all the tasks like machine translation and question answering. So this is the thing that we do also in music. So each token of notes, for instance, will be converted into a vector also. So I just I had to do this small explanation. So to tokenize text, so this is very straightforward. In fact, you just have to convert every word into an integer. The words come in a straight order, so there is no. It's easy. It's also easy for monophonic melody. For instance, you would just have to encode the current note being played into an integer. But how about this? This is a bit more difficult. In fact, it's not so difficult, but you have to think about how you will solve this problem. Because when you have polyphony, you can just encode a time step into a note. There are multiple notes, and in fact, each note has several attributes. There is the pitch, its duration, its onset time, and even its velocity. The velocity is something that we have in the MIDI format, and it's not a mandatory attribute. But it's good to have it to generate expressive performance. It's another dimension. So my point is that the music representation and the way that we will encode music into tokens, into sequences of integers, is really, really important. In fact, most of the recent music generative models are almost the same. So Music Transformer, MMM from Philippe, I'm sorry, Usenet, Under the Hood, these are almost exactly the same. It's just transformers with some of them small particularities, but the mathematics are exactly the same in almost all cases. The main difference between all these models is towards the input representation of the music and how you model music to be used with these neural networks. So if there is one thing to remember, is that input representation matters. So here is the first example of a tokenization technique which allows to model polyphonic music. So this is called MIDI-like. It was introduced by people from the Magenta team from Google, and which is still used today in some of their models. It's quite simple. In fact, it just converts the MIDI messages. For those who are familiar with MIDI messages, it converts these MIDI messages into tokens. So here you can see note on, velocity, time shift, and just under I put numbers. So these are actually the tokens. So the values are randomly picked, just to illustrate. So that's it. It has it works it's simple, it works. It has some downsides, but it works. Another one is it's called revamped MIDI. The particularity of this one is that it represents time not with time shifts events like before. So before, time shift indicate that the time is moving. Here you indicate the time with a special bar in green and position token, which indicate the current a bar token indicate that a new bar is beginning, and the position indicate the current position within this bar. So this is different because it allows the model to learn the onset times of music, and this can be in fact useful for instance, pop music or maybe techno music with repetitive patterns where the notes tends to have onset times, the same onset times across bits. And the duration of the notes is encoded through, yes?
Why they don't have to have the same onset time? So you have a small vocabulary of onset. It's like bills, right? One tick, 5 tick, 10 tick. If you have 4 ticks, it's 4 times 1 tick.
I'm not sure to understand. The onset time here is included with the position token. So
and how many position tokens do you have?
Oh, it depends. You can choose.
Yeah,
Yes. I'll go to this just after. That's a great question. And so the duration are encoded through a dedicated token, duration token. So another one, I'll be quick. Another one, structured media encoding, which has been proposed by Gaëtan Geras, in fact, recently. This one is a mix between the two previous one. There is a time shift event, but also duration tokens. In fact, the particularity is that you have also the same pattern of token types succession. It's a pitch, velocity, then duration, time shift, and again pitch, etc. It allows faster convergence. The model will learn faster. Now, a little bit more difficult, in fact, and I like this one. It's really similar to Remy, so which was this one with a bit the bar and position token. But the particularity is that it merges tokens together. In fact, what you see on the schema below is that you will transform each token. So for a time step, you will transform tokens into embeddings, and then you will concatenate the embeddings into a big embeddings, and then once again use a projection matrix to have an embedding of the size you want. I don't know if it's clear, but so this has the benefits that it reduces considerably the length of the sequence. For instance, here you have your sequence, but in fact you have 3 tokens for each note, pitch, velocity, and duration, and here you will have only one. The benefit of reducing the length of the sequence is that it reduces considerably the computing resources that are needed, especially with transformer models, which are requires a lot of memory and time. Another one which also merges tokens together. So the technique is the same actually. This one is a little bit particular as it allows to represent multi-track music with what's called program token. So program, not instrument, but program because of the MIDI programs. And with a kind of dedicated positional encoding, it's the bar and position tokens, as you can see here, which indicate for each time step the current bar and the current position of the note that is being played. And another one, which is once again a kind of mix between the last one and the Remy. So the time here is also represented with bar and position tokens, and it also allows to represent multi-track information. So it's called MIDI. It was introduced with the PopMag model. So now you may ask yourself which method is the best. In fact, I don't have an answer already made for you. In fact, it will depend on your use case and your data. But this is why I created so MidiTok. It's a Python package which implements all these strategies that has been introduced by previously by researchers in the same a common framework, which allows to represent information and music with the exact same accuracy. So I will just show you what I mean by this. So here is a Logic Pro. So I will open this one maybe. So here is a track, it's a piano track. This is the original track. And all the tracks are tracks that have or tracks that has been tokenized. So this track has been converted into sequence of tokens and then decoded back into a MIDI track. So the key point of MidiTok is to allow to encode MIDI into sequences of tokens to be used in neural networks the same way, with the same accuracy. So what I mean is that here you have a track encoded with the method MIDI-like. Here is a structured encoding. Here Remy, CPU word. You see that there is no change at all. So this is the main goal of MidiTok. It's actually to implement this method with the same accuracy to make sure that you can encode, you can represent the exact same information to not impose, but to allow a fair comparison of these strategies. So it's an easy way to pre-process and test these strategies. And if you want to just use, if you want to train a neural network to generate music, or not only generate, in fact, it's not the only use case. You just have to, you can install with a pip. You load your MIDI, you create an object, and that's it. You have your tokens, and you can train your model without worrying. So now, how to represent time? Because as we saw, you can represent time with either bar and position tokens or with time shift events, but you can also represent time so with musical units like bits, but also in seconds. In fact, the MIDI-like representation was first designed with seconds. Personally, I don't really like seconds because with seconds, you have to make sure that the tempo of your dataset stays quite the same or is consistent. Otherwise, the model will not really learn, will not have a sense of the rhythm, in fact. So this is something to consider. But the guys from Google use seconds and milliseconds, and it works. So anyway, this is something to consider. And also, if you choose to represent time with musical units, so with bits and bars, so here is the response to your answer, to the answer to your question. Sorry. Anyway, if you represent the time with bits and bars, you have in fact to quantize the time. So what I mean is that if you have a MIDI, the onset time of a note and the end of a note will not be quantized as it should be. You have to adjust the times so that it fits your representation and you can use it into your model. So once again. So here in yellow is a bit. So you can choose to represent here. The note has been quantized with 4 samples per bit, as you can see. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here is 8, 12, 16, and 32. So yeah, you might wonder, you might say 42 is better. In fact, it will depend. Here, this example is a little bit particular. This is the original track, in fact. So if I use 4 samples per bit, I will lose most of the time information and the expressivity. So I have to choose a higher value. So 8 looks great. Not great, but it could be better, but it's okay, I believe. This is even better. Even better. So I don't recommend to use 42, in fact, because when your model will predict values, position values, and duration values, in fact, if you use a very high resolution, you will have the model will have a higher perplexity. The perplexity is the model will not will hesitate to predict the exact value. So it is with a smaller resolution, the model will have a lower hesitation, and this is also something to consider, in fact. So one solution to me is to use different resolutions, and this is something implemented in MidiTok. So you can choose to have a very high resolution for really short notes, which tends to occur more often sometimes. And for longer notes, you just use a less accurate resolution, for instance, 4 or whatever you want. And this is also something done. I'm not the only one to do that. In fact, this is also done by the Magenta team, and also in the piano in painting application, a recently proposed model. So another question is, can we present more information? And of course, yes, we can. And this is done in MidiTok also. So, so something that can be done is to include some additional, what I call additional tokens. So there is a chord tokens, rests, tempo, and program. So a chord token is intended to indicate, okay, so there is a chord just after. Rest indicate rest. The tempo indicates the tempo, and the program is in fact to just for multi-track purpose. So this is an example of what this looks like. So you have also tempo and rest token here. So it's for MIDI, Remy. But are they actually really useful? This is a question you may have. Personally, I do have this question because if I go back to here, the chords and chords tokens and tempo tokens, especially, are types of tokens that are used, in fact, in the original papers who presented and introduced the Remy compound word strategies, but also Octuple and MIDI. But none of them really give proof of are they really useful? Do they really bring expressive information to the model? And will the generation be better? When you are with some, an NLP, sometimes to assess a model's capabilities, you make him do some grammar task. So with chord, for instance, we can just test a model. Does it really predict chords like it should be? And is it capable to detect also chords in a sequence of notes? For the rest, this is actually the same, similar. Does the model produce a rest with rest tokens and not just notes and undeclared rests? And the tempo also. This is it really useful for a model. If we want a model to predict and to change the tempo, is it actually necessary? And so also to consider, because we can also include time signature, system pedal, bank select, and MIDI control change messages. This could be done. I didn't do it right now, so Philippe did it for the time signature, actually, so, which is great. And even more. Now, just a few words about the multi-track representation, which is also something that I tend to measure. If you want to model multiple tracks into a model for multi-track generation like MMM, you might have several options, so like octuple and MidiTok, but also the one in MMM, so it's the schema from the paper. But nobody tested which is the best. I find this is too bad, actually. So this is something I intend to do. And so maybe off topic, but the last thing I'm working on is the efficient transformers. So I will not dig into the details, but the main bottleneck of transformer networks nowadays is the complexity of this family of networks. The complexity is quadratic with the length of input sequence. So as you can see, it's the A attention matrix. This is a problem, actually. You are calculating a L square matrix, and so if your input sequence is long, your model will require a big amount of memory, and sometimes, many times, in fact, you will end up with out of memory error, so you cannot run, you cannot even run the model on your hardware. So this is why some recent research actually used what's called the kernel trick, which is a mathematical trick to estimate nonlinear operations with a linear complexity. So I will not dig too much into the details, but it allows to reduce the complexity of the models a lot, and to either allow to run the model on smaller hardwares, like embedded instruments or other IoT objects, but also to endorse more longer context, more longer input sequences, and so potentially more longer portions of music. So that's it. This is actually my last slide. I'm not into audio representations, but I know that some of you work with them, and I thought it was too bad to not talk about audio representation during this talk. So it's just an open slide, in fact, for if some of you may want to discuss about what we could do with audio generative systems and include them in co-creativity environments. In fact, something that can be done is some multi-modal generative system with both symbolic music and audio music, audio representation, because as in a creative, when you work on a digital audio workstation, you will most likely have several tracks, and with both symbolic music and also audio samples. And I think there might be something to dig in. So that's it. I leave it up to you.
Questions? So,
I have a question.
yes.
Yeah.
There's another question.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, I think that's useful work. It's also a library for that. And certainly you can grow functionalities to the plans to the library. So you say you're going to compare the representations. What would be the methodology to do so?
Can you repeat?
You want to compare the different
Yes.
representations? And what would be your methodology?
Yeah, my methodology will be like I showed, to make sure that you represent music with the exact same way. This is the key point, and also to use models, different types of models with the exact number of parameters. So if I go back here, if I want to compare, for instance, the two types of models of transformers. What I want to do is to make sure that the models have the exact same number of parameters, and that the only difference will be on the mathematical estimation of the attention, to make sure that the comparison is as fair as possible.
Interesting. And of course, you want to get the same precision with less structure.
Mm.
And then an answer to the previous question, where were we before? You talked, and this question for you too, but you talked about where on the beginning. That's really a question about that. But when you use Tokenize conditional music, you don't do it.
Well, you do embeddings to feed data to your network.
No, you don't.
Yes,
So
you
what
do.
Processing, because this way it doesn't work in the dictionary. That's what it works for Tokenize. So they don't reduce things, right?
Yes, but you do, in fact. Transformer networks process embeddings, not just tokens.
Because in our case, are you taking the keyboard, and that's something problematic for the community? I hope your paper can help. Is that the vocabulary used changed? So are you talking about the even size on the division? Is that what you mean?
Yes, this is why. This is what.
So that's fine. Yeah. Okay, so that's.
Can you show the screen?
I think we lost the internet. Is it just me or we lost the internet?
Thanks.
Sorry, so
Yes.
yeah. So yeah, 512 is our.
512, okay. Yeah. Kind of a default value.
Yeah,
But it's enough in most cases, and with eight heads, attention heads, I believe.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay.
And then after at the end with all what I talked about, it's about 600.
Okay.
So when we do some density, we
Yeah, it's
10 we divide the possible density in 10 buckets, and with an uniform distribution, and density 1 is the 10% less dense for this instrument, for this bar, for this.
Yeah, 600 is actually quite big.
Hi.
It's Professor at PUC-Rio.
What is about embedding space with in my understanding, you just build embedding space based on the collections you have in place. And but what would be the traditional way of doing this? Where is the when you work in a traditional way or a non-traditional way, you do imagine.
Well, yes, you do. In fact, just like I show, I will show you the transformer schema. Okay, okay, here it is. In fact, when you feed data to your transformer, you have to. It's not really a sequence. In fact, it's a matrix. It's a sequence of embeddings vectors. So because afterwards, how to put this? The operations afterwards inside the model will be most of the time the feed-forward networks, for instance, here is done independently on each embedding vector, not on all the embeddings at the same time. So this is why it's not just a sequence of tokens which is passing through the networks, but a sequence of embeddings.
So, if I understood, right, you guys are able to compare in the binary space the structure of the data. I mean, because one problem that you spoke of was about how to compare the result between your and the straightforward way or traditional way. And instead of looking at the end of the process and the result of music, you could take a look at human body space, trying to understand that if the points you are feeding have the same structure in terms of distribution of the characteristics compared to the traditional organization. Right? And because if you have the same structure in terms of topology, for instance, or statistical distribution, it's likely that you are feeding the neural network with the same information, but in a different way of representing the information.
Yes.
And I suppose it is, okay, the result in music would change, but not by an additional information, but the way that you feed the tokens, the data, the embedding space. So, did you guys try this, in terms of investigating this embedding space,
So,
results in embedding space, comparing both data, both points related to the tradition from using music and embedding music and talking, embedding tokens in this space.
yeah. Oh, this is not something that we've tried. In fact, I did not even think about explore and compare the embedding spaces because in music, I'm not sure embedding spaces have much importance, if I may say. Whereas in for text, words have meanings and can be closed, like I showed. But in music, in fact, you will not your embeddings will represent like a pitch, a range of pitch, a range of velocity values, a range of duration values. Just what this kind of tokens, which don't have much meaning in fact. So I don't know if comparing their embedding spaces is meaningful. Maybe we could try. I think nobody never did that.
Yeah, I'm saying this because in text mining, not only processing, we do this sometimes. Try to apply the embedding distribution has the same signature in terms of the data. There is always a signature behind the embedding space. So even if the data are not at the same point, and obviously you will not because they were generated in a different way, the signature may be the same. And as long as it happens,
Est-ce que tu as un chargeur de Mac?
say that, okay,
Est-ce que tu as un chargeur de Mac?
the information here is the same, and most probably the result in music we are trying to work on, to generate it would be at the same amount in terms of the data as the same of the data. So that's why you confused me earlier on. Is because in an LP, the embedding does dimension reduction.
Exactly.
In this case, the embedding doesn't do dimension reduction because you're going to end up with, let's say, 512, a vector, an eigenvector of 512, you get only 400 tokens. So disentangling the embedding is a non-problem. Yeah, opposed to an LP, right?
Yeah.
But someone could decide to do the embeddings for a bar, for example, and then there'll be millions and millions of possible bars that you have to fit in the vector of 512. And the vector, that would be the same issue would have to be looked at. But in this case, we never. That's why we never looked into it because it's easy to move from the encoding 400 tokens, different tokens with a 512 long vector. It's trivial. Yeah, but still very interesting to compare because what matters in here is the number of tokens.
But not only the number, but how you adjust the token themselves. Yes.
Yeah, because this problem is it's very close. I mean, we talk about it. It's when in electronics you have a channel of communication, and you translate all the channel in different ways. And mostly that's what we're trying to propose. We are proposing a new representation model under another representation abstraction. And the question that's not to us, I mean, at least is your PhD, you're pursuing the PhD, is to understand if this representation is worthwhile in terms of performance for it. But what I found very interesting is the signature behind the value representation is the same or not?
Yes.
Because in text it should be, and the music is so it's way far complex than text.
Well, it depends. For it's scores, so it's simple. For waves, they have the same problem.
Yeah.
Waves, the size embedding, that's complicated. But here the embedding, you tell me what you think, Nathan, but the embedding is not.
No, in fact, nobody looks into embeddings for symbolic music because we don't care about the values of the embeddings of each of these tokens. But maybe it might be interesting to look their values.
Yes, and see what happens.
No, just to look the values of, for instance, the same types of tokens through different representations, so through different tokenization strategies. For instance, here the pitch tokens from Remy, and the pitch token from structure, and the one from compound, and see if, in fact, yes, there is some kind of similarity. Maybe this could be something we could be done. No, nobody ever did this.
That's interdisciplinary insight. Maybe the technique of the LP could be looked at because they work on those embedding a lot.
Yes.
Just one last question. I found very interesting the model representation.
Yes, thank you.
Very, very interesting because I would say that the music is analog, and we're trying to create its specialization. To try to. But is there any other sort of model trying to represent? I mean, because I used to play guitar, and there are different ways of representing music. Like tablature. It was when it's English, it's tablature tables. Anyway, have you seen something at least similar to the model proposal?
So, you mean early results?
Yeah, I mean, the token. The way that you represent music here, by using this token, I understand that this is a way of
So, So for now, I did not conducted many experiments as I spent a lot of time to re-implement these tokenization strategies and also to work on the evaluation metrics. In fact, because as we already mentioned, it's something that is really really problematic in music generation and content generation. But what I can say maybe is that if you represent time with bar and position tokens, the model will more easily learn to create repetitive patterns from each bit. So this is true.
But that I don't
And,
understand why.
well,
Because with bar and delta, it's exactly the same. It's very similar, but you would have. No, you're right. You have that machine.
yeah, maybe it also depends on the nature of your data, of course. Because I will go back to one slide. This one, the way to represent time, so bits or seconds. With classical music, with just like I showed before, the onset times of the notes, even especially if you are using performances of music as data, so like I showed you, there is no repetitive onset times. It's the performer. So maybe using seconds might be more relevant, but still considering the tempo, of course.
We have one question here from Carl.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Hello, Nathan.
How can I so?
Do you hear me? Yes. Tell me if you're hearing me with thumbs up. Well, great. Nathan, congratulations. I unfortunately I jumped in the middle of your presentation, but I can appreciate the quality of your work, especially that you are developing this package that I think is going to be absolutely useful for us researchers in this matter. And here with the Bible, I think that you know it. So I can tell that you were working in representations, and it's been something that I've been also digging at the time of starting to creating my generation models. I start seeing, for instance, the problems with piano roll representations in terms of holding notes. Then I found this note hold ending representations where you use the underscore for delimiting the duration, and I start working with it. And my main question is, as far as I saw that you worked a lot in terms of tokenization and representation, which is the representation that you find most useful in terms of using transformers? I'm actually using simpler networks as LSTM, but my main question is if you found some way of measuring the performance using different kind of tokenization of representations, and if you recommend me someone for generation. Maybe mainly that's my question. Also, maybe to know how do you decide the subdivision. I work with 16, sometimes 24 for having triplets stuff or whatever. So my main question is that if you have one kind of representation that turns to be the best in generation performance, if you have some way of measuring the quality of your generated material, and also something about the subdivision you choose for your tokenization.
Okay. Yeah, well. Yeah, well, if I have to choose one representation, I think I will go with CP world, compound world. So it's the one with the first one which merges tokens together. In fact, it's to use this kind of representation, you have to use a little trick at the input and output of your model. But this is something which works great. And which allows to reduce considerably the length of the sequence, and which is very good for performance. I really love to optimization and to have the best performance in most cases. So this is a big deal to me, and also because I know that representing time with bits, with bar and bits units. Might makes more sense to me to use musical units with music. And about the resolution, the number of samples per bit, well, again, I think it will depend on your music. On the example I just showed before, it's a complicated example. It will require a higher resolution, like 16, for instance. But in most cases, for popular music, for instance, 4 might be good and might allow to a model to have a fewer, a lower perplexity when predicting auto-regressively music.
In terms of the compactness of the representation, because then you really change the length of the input vectors or matrix, as you put it, like sequence of vectors. So you know which one is more compact, and also without sacrificing the precision of the representation. The second thing is the functionality. For example, with our bar, there's no, because we mark bars, we can select bars, but we can't select notes, right? Because the notes, if it's polyphonic and they all overlap within the bar stuff, they're not isolated. We can't access them directly like that. So you see that there's a clear functional limitation of the representation. So I don't know if you identify other functional representations where you definitely can't do that with that representation, you can't do that with this one, things like that.
Yeah, in fact, there are some limitations with each of them. For instance, with MIDI-like, the biggest downside is that you have not on and not off events. So you don't predict the duration of the note. In fact, you just predict when it ends. But sometimes a model will predict a not on event, so a note is being played. It will move in time, but it will never predict, okay, so this note is stopping. So you will have a note which is playing forever. So this is a downside. With the other representations, so like I showed, some of them allows to include additional information, for instance, the tempo or chord tokens. It really depends on how you structure the information. I don't know if I can simply explain this. It would be faster with the visual representations. No.
And on the compactness,
on the compactness, octuple is the shortest because in fact for each note you have a time step. So you are sure that for if you have 100 notes, you will have a sequence length of 100 merged token. Yes.
Just a question. If you use this token, and then you do, it's a very common technique to use to analyze letters, especially in social networks.
Yes. Okay.
Try to found super graph inside that. And I was wondering, you try to do this, this optimization structure, try to take a look at that and see, okay, this string of tokens is, we can try to translate it as a supernode in order to try to drive the way you want the neural network. Try to understand what you did as important in terms of using. But because when you add new sort of abstraction, new representation, you start to put your priors inside the priors as well. You start to drive the. No, I wouldn't say definition because the term is not the solutions. Have you thought about?
I'm not sure to get exactly the question.
Super representations for your tokens. Like you have a piece of tokens, and okay, you look at this and say, okay, this I can translate for a new token.
So let's say the majority of your nodes are 16s.
Mhm.
Each time you're gonna have a node on a delay, 3 tokens.
Yes.
Them, right? Why don't you just basically so that's a different type of work that they do in LP where they sort of work on compressing the
Oh, okay. No, I think I
and in a way, a score is also a directed graph. That way, and if some of those sequences of edges repeat themselves a lot, then you factorize it. And here you go get this token, and in mine you divide, let's say by 3 in that case.
Okay. I'm not really aware of the sequence graphs, but
yeah, and this is a way to put focus on some characteristic, because maybe this this new token created to substitute this string of other tokens could be more frequent than the other ones, and then it makes the neural network model then understands or perceive that this part of the tokens are more important or more highlighted or less highlighted. So it's more complex than we have the network.
okay, I look into this, but the merging strategies like compound world or like actual is not the same, but it will reduce the length and add the compactness the same way. Not the same way, but the same compactness if you want. So to reduce, for instance, instead of having 3 tokens per node, just 1 token, in fact, at the end. So this is another strategy, I believe, but I will look into this.
There gonna be some golden nuts in LP.
Okay, yeah, but something that a metric that I implemented is something to measure if a network actually predicts good token types successions. Okay, I show my screen. It will be okay. Thanks. It's more easy with a visual. Okay, so here you have a sequence of tokens. But for instance, if I'm predicting a note, so for instance, the model predicts a pitch token, so D3. After this, it should predict a velocity token because this is the syntax of the representation. It should, but will it predict a velocity token? If I don't put some control, it would possibly predict another type of token, for instance, a position here or another pitch, something that I don't want. If you don't put some control and some kind of some kind of guidance, it could generate errors. And it's something that a metric that I implemented is to measure if a model actually predicts good types successions autoaggressively. Yes. In fact, you can use some kinds of graph guidance, because in fact each token type will have just another set of token types, possible token types after it's a directed graph. You could represent this as a directed graph.
Because in text, when you do this, it tends to shrink the model. And it's an advantage. It's nice to know.
Yes. I will note that.
It's a lot from the questions and the comments.
Thanks again.
Before, that's the end, but I just want to publicize something. Last week, I was on the committee of the thesis, really close to this topic.
Andrzej
Sivka, I can send it to you, and wonderful work, system, and on the style translation, including accompaniment. And so just I put it for, your night related to this issue. The interesting thing is that if kind of conjecture that they could, when you put the time information directly into the representation, the type, etc., this may conflict with the transformer own kind of position information, and somehow they could
collide.
They make some kind of double the intrinsic, how to say in English, but information about the time from the music oriented representation, and you have the home mechanics of the transformer to the positional encoding to know where the data items are, and somehow the music domain information is bad. But anyway, so representation is very important. People will say, well, data deep learning, does it automatically from raw data? No. Representation always, it's like culture, you try to get rid of it. It comes back. So I think we should close. Lots of questions, lots of questions, lots of answers, more questions.
Thank you, everyone.
Great presentations. Very dense. Okay. We still have one day. Well, Kadu was back. We're supposed to speak in the Monday morning, and unfortunately got a very bad infection, but it's kicking. So he will speak tomorrow after Philippe and Mateus, Carlos. So we still have time. So I think it would be interesting to get your inputs as well. So to augment the. So don't hesitate. Your experience, and so we still have time tomorrow. So we'll start around 9 because we're never exactly on time. And have a great evening, night, and see you tomorrow. Thank you.